Hi guys, welcome to the archive. This week's build is, surprising nobody, modular. You can use it for a ton of different things, from basic things like archways and arched stone walls to murals that look like they've been painted onto a wall, the whitewashed wall, something like that, to portals, which you can use at the bottom here, which are far more detailed and actually look like the kind of terrain that would be on the other side of the portal. Whatever you use them as, these things add a ton of options to almost any dungeon or building that allow you to customize it on the fly with inserts to match any faction that is either inhabiting it or made it in the first place. This isn't the end either. I have a ton more ideas for inserts for these pieces that would allow you to use it in even more different ways. But there's only so much time in a week, so this is what I've got for now. I was originally going to make these pieces as a part of next week's video, but I ended up having more and more ideas for different ways you could use this one piece. So I decided to break it out and make it a video of its own to show you the potential of what it could become, rather than having it as a small part of a video and kind of wasting that modular potential. If you do need any tools or supplies for this build, you can find links to everything on my equipment list, which is linked in the description below. If you do buy from this list, some of the links are affiliate links, which help support the channel without costing you a penny. To get started, per piece I wanted to build, I needed one piece of 1/4 inch thick XPS foam, 3.5 inches by 3 inches, and two pieces of 1/8 inch thick foam of the same size. This is actually totally optional and purely for a nice aesthetic finish. You can do this build with one piece of 1/2 inch thick foam cut to that size with a simple knife. It just won't have that nice effect at the edges of the arch, though even that you could cut in if you felt confident enough. To cut this easily for 10 arches, I cut 5 pieces of 1 inch thick XPS foam to 3.5 inches by 3 inches, and then cut those in half and half again, which gave me the 10 1/4 inch thick pieces I needed. When cutting these pieces in half, it's a good trick to keep the temperature on your hot wire as low as it can go. This minimises the foam lost when cutting and keeps them approximately the right size. When trying to split a piece in half, I also rely more on lining the piece up against the wire when it isn't on, and eyeballing it to be as symmetrical as possible. In my experience, this works a lot better than trying to measure an exact amount, which tends to give you one piece slightly bigger than the other. I then took the other 10 1/4 inch pieces that I'd cut and cut those in half again to be 1/8 inch thick, giving me the final pieces that I needed. When cutting pieces that are this thin, I found that it's a good idea to keep one finger on each corner of the piece to keep it flat against the support. Finally, I cut some 3 inch by 1/2 inch columns, which I cut a slit into halfway on one side while I was at it. The idea was to save a job later, but I'd now advise doing this after the piece is painted to stop sticky wash and paint interfering with the slot. Now I have my pieces, I grabbed my template, which is available for free on my Patreon. If you're watching this video after a while has passed, just click see all posts at the bottom and change the filter at the top to download, which should show you all of the free stuff there to date, as well as showing you all the stuff that I've made as thank yous to my patrons, which you can get access to by supporting the channel. The templates are reusable. I included a second large one in case you wanted to glue it to the foam to cut out or something like that. Once I'd cut those out, I laid them on top of the foam that I'd cut earlier, the small inner arch on the thicker foam and the large outer arch on the thinner foam. Then I just drew on where I would need to cut using a marker. Once that was done, I cut out each arch using an x-acto knife to keep things precise. I used this rather than a craft knife, so I'd be able to cut the curve more easily and preserve the cut-out arch pieces. These we can use later to make modular inserts. You want to try and make sure your cuts are as close to vertical as possible to keep them straight. Alternatively, you can use a hot wire, but I'm not a huge fan of that for precise cuts. Don't panic too much if your cut ends up less than vertical. You can straighten it out a bit just by squashing the foam down to be as straight as possible. Now I had those arch pieces, I hot glued them together with the thin pieces on the outer edge of each one. Once I'd done that, I cut in an 1/8 of an inch line around the outer edges of the arch and cut lines into them at 1 inch intervals from the bottom to make them look like separate pieces of stone, and beveled it lightly with the very tip of a ballpoint pen. I then cut and beveled bricks into the wall to match the pattern on my other walls, remembering there's currently a 1/2 inch row missing from the bottom of the piece. You can also punch in accessory slots at the top at this point, or leave those until you need them. Check out my temple video for more on this modular accessory system if you're interested. I then textured the piece of stone using balled up tinfoil from top to bottom, being gentle with the delicate pieces of the arch itself. Then I cut a slit about 1/4 inch deep in the centre of the inner archway. This is what will allow me to use inserts in the piece. Though I did this early on in the build, like I mentioned earlier, I wish I'd saved this until after painting, to stop sticky wash getting into the crack, so that's what I would advise for you guys. Finally, I added magnets to the top and on both sides, designed to line up with double stacked walls. If you want to know more about installing magnets like this, check out my magnetic building system video. The link should be on the screen or in the description, or both. I then did some quick work on the column, cutting and texturing it as stone just like the arch, before cutting out a card tab connection slot in the side opposite to the slit that I cut. Doing this is pretty easy. You just need to cut 2 lines 1/4 inch out from the center inch, and then trim the foam out of the center until a piece of card will fit smooth in the gap. Then just trim the center inch a bit more until another piece of thick card would slot in underneath, and hot glue the card in place at the sides. If you want to know more about this technique, check out the magnetic building system video in the description. It goes through it all in complete detail. Then I placed a magnet facing south side down at the bottom, exactly as I showed for a normal wall in that magnetic building system video. To connect this bottom piece to the main arch, I cut cocktail sticks in half, sharpened the pointy end to be even pointier so I wouldn't damage the foam, and rounded off the flat end that I cut. I pushed these quite deep into the underside of the arch bottom, leaving about a 1/2 inch poking out, just under a 1/2 inch. I then lined these up with the bottom piece, punched 2 fresh holes straight down, being careful not to push out the other side, and slotted it in place. After building these pieces, because isn't that always the way, I realised I could have cut slits in the bottom here and used serial card to connect them instead. I edited some as an experiment and found that it worked well, and also allowed me to use them as internal walls that would slot between tiles, making them a bit easier to use internally. For painting, I followed the exact same paint scheme as for the rest of my stonework. Do I need a new brush? Probably. Support the channel on Patreon. I use a base coat of tan and Mod Podge. I follow that up by painting on a tan grey and a light grey. I then dry brush that with tan and then more lightly with white. And then give the whole thing a black-brown wash before sealing it with the water-based spray in my equipment list. For more details on this scheme, check out my painting stone video. I did something slightly different here in that I kept all of the arch pieces the same tan colour, and I didn't use the red tone colour. But other than that, the technique is identical. If you're finding this video useful, it would be awesome if you could like and subscribe, or even share the video to help me reach more people like you. Anyway, back to the point. And that's our modular archway, but there's a little bit more to it than that. first and most obvious slot in is a stone wall, so you can use the piece as a more decorative wall. This is pretty straightforward and why I saved those arch cutouts. All I did was texture one lightly as a stone wall, being careful not to make the cuts too deep, and trim it down to about 1/8 of an inch thick. I then tacky glued it to some cereal card and cut that out slightly larger than the arch before inserting it. I then made a second arch of stone and glued it in place while the piece was slotted in, so I was sure that it'd be lined up on both sides. It's also a good idea to be careful not to paint most of the exposed cereal card, so it'll slot in smoothly without sticking. You can get away with painting the very edges that might be visible, just don't cover the whole lot. The others are still pretty easy, especially if you use some of my Patreon thank you printouts. You can do these yourself with a little bit of effort and know-how, but the downloads I made for patrons cut all of that out and let you get straight to printing, while you support the future of the channel as well. Higher level patrons also gain access to the source Photoshop files so they can tweak things to their liking and more easily add their own images. For the portals, I printed out the portal image onto photo paper at best quality to keep it looking as real as possible. You don't have to, but it does look better. You can then glue this to serial card or just print it straight onto photo card like I did here. I'd highly recommend using the proper photo paper for your printer for this, which in my case was HP Basic photo paper. I've used cheap photo paper before and it just isn't durable in my experience. The photo rubs off with the slightest contact. The proper paper here is actually a pretty good investment. You can then cover up the back with another arch of stone in exactly the same way as before, if you even care what the back looks like. For the murals, I made some more printables for patrons, which I did some Photoshop wizardry on to make them look as though they're faded paintings on a whitewashed wall. I also printed these using plain paper to give a more faded effect, to help with this illusion. Finally, there's an alternative stonework option that lets you print off arches of white or black marble, a simple whitewashed wall, and one that is drow themed with purple marble and spider symbols everywhere, and a dwarven one with inscriptions of the deeds of their ancestors. If you translate these actually say things in those languages. For example, the hanging spider says obedience to Lolth, while the web one says her web hangs over us all. Anyway, this stonework is best printed on photo paper again to get that marble sheen. The exception being the whitewash, which I printed on normal paper to keep it more matte and faded. And that's it. These pieces are so flexible. Even at their most basic, they add a more decorative flair to dungeons as an arched wall. Not to mention allowing you to make bigger walls and layouts in general, because these advanced pieces that can be used for other things can also serve as simple as another wall. They're also great for adding interesting cover to dungeons. Using them as archways within a room or large corridor adds places for enemies and players to duck between and snipe at each other from. They also work great as windows for a ruined abbey. You could even use them as arched cloisters, not so dissimilar from the kind you see in monasteries, or Harry Potter, or the cathedral used to film Harry Potter, where I went more times than I can count on various school trips, eating sandwiches in the graveyard for some reason. Weirdly good dungeon design inspiration though. Then there's the murals, which are awesome again for adding a little bit of easy flavour. Literally all you need to do is print them out and slot them in. That's it. You can even get away without using card to stick them in if you don't mind the other side being exposed. And as I mentioned, I have more plans for evil and race-specific variants of these in future, everything from devils to mind flayers. Keep an eye on the channel. Aside from the mundane uses, the portals are an amazing way of making a portal or portal room that shows the destination rather than just a generic swirl. I really like the variety that it gives to a portal room with tons of optional locations.
It could even be a portal trap room, where different creatures emerge from each biome to assault the group, while they try and get back out through the locked door. Do they stay, or do they take their chances in one of the friendlier looking portals?
I have far more planned for this system in the future as well. Not just printables like the portals and the murals, but other accessories that can be used with this system. Like I said, next week's video is a perfect example. I hope you guys got some ideas or inspiration from this build to build something modular for yourself. The more modular something is, I've found, the more you can build for yourself in less time. Let me know what you like about the system, what you might change about it in the comments. All feedback is good feedback. That and the algorithm beast needs feeding. If you enjoy these videos that I work on for you guys every week and you'd like to help me make more of them in future, the best way you can do that is by joining me in the archive on Patreon. By doing that, you get a couple of different things. Early access to new videos, as well as the ability to vote on upcoming projects. This, for example, was part of a voted on project from Patreon. Most importantly though, you'll be helping me provide more content like this regularly for the community. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be back next week with something extra special and pretty damn big. It's the culmination of a lot of these projects that I've been building over the past few weeks into something very special and very modular. Until then, I'll be in the archive.